So hey guys, today we're going to be talking about just uh essentially I guess this is still a Duelist Cup type thing, so I'll refer to it as such. But if we want to look at this the most optimal strategy, like just in theory, we don't know necessarily if this is doable, right? But if we're going to be going against all of these annoying cards in stage two, what are we looking to do? So there are three primary types of decks. We could break them down into pretty simply, right? There are cards that can not play under like macro or fissure, right? And then there are going to be decks that can. And then there's going to be stun. If we break down all of the decks into these three categories, we'll have essentially uh more or less control decks or stun. And then we have like uh barking, snake eye, super heavy samurai, pretty much like everything else, which just loses to fissure like Tillman as well. And then we have like Laundries, Kishtira, Exo Sister, we have all this stuff. So fissure affects, like if we were to put the decks into a percentage, it'll probably affect 50% or more of decks, making this a very good card. The only downside, of course, is that this only goes first. The going second ability of this falls off, depending on what cards are actually being played, actually. So if branded were the top deck, then this is actually even stronger than usual because Mirror Jade cannot send under Fissure. So there's that, right? Notably, to save like main deck space, though, we are not playing Called by here. Idea is pretty simple. What we can do here is we can, assuming we have Kishira Unicorn and we have Fissure, I can special summon Unicorn. Then if my opponent ashes me, we're not too peeved. The only thing we're really peeved about is infinite impermanence. If we get max seed here on Theosis, we still get to rip one from the extra deck, and we still can make like Fenrir and then pass, and we have Fissure, so we can just pass on these two, and it's not too bad. We could also then go into a Rise Heart to play around some more things. And to go into a Rise Heart, we only need to do one more special summon, so our opponent does get a Pot of Greed, but even if you were to just essentially draw, let's see, it'll be 3 cards collectively cycling your hand, right? So that's max C, drawing the 1 card off of special summoning a Rise Heart, and then draw for turn, that's like 3 cards. In those 3 cards, what are the odds of your opponent opening backer removal when main deck backer removal is already so scarce? So, in a situation like this, Fissure is clearly just going to go ham here, and it's just going to win us the duel anyways, and we don't even have to consider these guys anymore. They just happen to be on the field, and Fissure is there also. We can also look at it that way. So that's pretty much how it'll go. Our opponent can't play, and they're heavily restricted, and it becomes pretty impossible to deal with like Fenrir Unicorn. And then if we were to move on from this, there are decks that can then kind of play under these circumstances, either like they'll be able to deal with Rise Heart or macro-like effects. In those cases, of course, we can stack Deck Lockdown on top of what we already have. Deck Lockdown already is going to allow us to set up hard enough that our opponent could never do anything to us, right? So that's one reason Deck Lockdown is super good. The other reason, of course, is that Deck Lockdown prevents our opponents from playing, but not as much ourselves. So notably, this gets destroyed during our second standby phase after activation. And for any listeners here, I guess I'll read the card effect as well. So neither player can add cards from the deck to their hand, except by drawing them. Monsters cannot be special summoned from the main deck, right? So this restriction is applied to both players, but since this gets destroyed during our second standby phase after activation, this allows us to play immediately first out of lockdown, meaning our opponent cannot play under, well, if they cannot play under lockdown, they just cannot play. And we'll get essentially, you could just say like a second turn for almost free. Our opponent does have the chance to draw into like another piece of interruption, but we do get to draw into 2 cards as well. So it kind of balances out a little bit. And there's odds of drawing something like Rise Heart, Fenrir, Kishira Theosis, Rise Heart, Unicorn, Theosis, just whatever, right? And this becomes pretty impossible to deal with eventually. And we could also open into or draw into another like fissure, or if we don't already have it, we can just grab fissure, and that might stall other decks. Notably though, Kushtira itself is very bad under deck lockdown, so this is extremely good for the mirror, right? So our opponent special summons Kashira Unicorn. What can they do with Unicorn? Nothing. If our opponent already had Theosis, what can they do? Also nothing. So the only real thing we have to worry about is if our opponent opened either Birth or Preparation with Kashira Rise Heart. If they did not open like this exactly, there is no chance they can play under lockdown. Everything here searches. Although, I guess Fenrir can at least remove the lockdown potentially. You have that going for you. And not much else that is to say. So, yeah. If we were to, let's see, then face off against Stun, it mostly comes down to who goes first or second, depending on what, like, you want to be willing to tech into your deck for them. We could reasonably throw in some main decked removal, some evenlies and stuff, but still pretty iffy. So that is problematic just in general for every single deck. We'll have essentially every other deck, and then we'll have Stun. So the issue is specifically if you're going first against Stun, you would need backer removal to remove stuff. But then they have Solemn Judgments and stuff. So it becomes even more like dicey. So it's just a very feels bad man if you're ever going against Stun, having to main deck stuff against Stun. So we'd have to like scratch out the entirety of this deck essentially and change the engine to make it so that we don't have to suffer as much. But in terms of just like engines, what engine could go second into Stun anyways and still play under most of these conditions? Well, I guess we could try, for example, Unchained is not the worst. I believe Unchained cards don't even require to be sent to the graveyard, although this will affect your grind game. So let's notably check this one. This card on the field is destroyed by Battle War card effect. You can add a card in your graveyard. So we can always activate like a fissure later or macro later as we were playing Unchained, and that would be fine. It's going first strategy. Fissure actually has a lot more mileage than you might think against Stun as well. I guess I forgot to mention this, but any deck that plays Dogmatic Punishment or Nadir Servant, they're essentially useless against Fissure because Dogmatic Punishment will not be able to send any cards to the graveyard, making the card completely useless and do nothing. And that also makes Nadir Servant essentially almost useless, depending on exactly what our opponent has, but yeah. In general, it shouldn't do much, though. So, following this up, we don't really have too much going on, I guess. In terms of being able to play under, like, Fissure and Lockdown, though, the only deck that could do so, like, somewhat reasonably, is probably Stun. But if we have, like, a Rise Heart on the field, for, like, Fenrir, Unicorn, and all that jazz, we're fine, right? We wouldn't really be worried, regardless of the fact of them being able to deal with this or not. So, yeah, those are the primary 3 types of decks I guess you would be worried about. So the main issue here is going to be balancing out a way to deal with the stun decks. The stun decks are, in my opinion, the most annoying aspect that you have to consider with deck building, is it messes up, essentially, I guess you would say, the flow of your main deck, trying to deal with all that stuff. And backer removal not being that insanely useful here. The most we might be able to manage is to run like Cosmic or Evenly. Cosmic is just more generically useful, so might want to go with Cosmic. Cosmic seems pretty good here, I suppose, just in general. Only being able to trade 1 for 1 is kind of just tragic when Duster can like wipe out all back row, but there are multiple aspects to consider, like uh, Duster is mostly a going second card and cannot be utilized going first in the same way that Cosmic Cyclone can. And then there is also the idea of uh, let's see, Duster is a 1 of, Cosmic Cyclone is at 3, so we have that going for us as well. And oh, Changing is here. For example, we could trigger Changing with it, I guess. That's an idea, which is interesting enough, I guess. But yeah. In general, the things to look out for the most, I think, aside from the I guess meta decks, is just mostly looking out for fissure and then just stun. So yeah, fissure, a rise heart, that type of deal. Depends on exactly what you're playing, but if you have the out, you have the out, I guess. Macro removal will be pretty important. So 3 evenly or 3 cosmic, both pretty good considerations to have, but if it cuts too much into your like engine or your non-engine, it might become not so worth playing. So we do have to find a balance, which is pretty hard. Not opening cards will, of course, feel pretty bad as well. Well, the ones you need, anyways. It is very hard to deal with all these decks. But I mean, there's always the Giga Gamer strategy of simply always winning the coin flip. In that case, you won't be a victim, I suppose. So that's all I've got for you guys today. If you have anything you want to say, feel free to do so in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.